Hello and welcome to the Public Health Leaders' Voices, the show where we unpack real world leaders' stories from people shaping healthier systems. I'm your host, Amjad Saeed, and today I'm honored to sit down with Prof. Moodie. Rob is a global public health leader. He brings decades of experience in prevention, leadership, and global health education. He worked in frontline in Sudan and led Victoria Health, advised the WHO and UNAIDS. Now, he's helping students to get their MPH in Malawi at the same time working here in Melbourne at Nossel Institute for Global Health as a professor of public health. Today, he's passionate about advocating for commercial determinant of health and a mentor for the next generation of change makers. Hello, Rob.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for accepting the invite. And actually, I was impressed about your rich experience, and I truly advise our listeners to check the description below to read more about his great contribution to the public health field.
Great.
We'll start with a light question with you, Rob. Looking back, Rob, did you always see yourself as a leader in public health, or Rob is something that emerged or evolved with time?
Well, I mean, I originally started off my career. I mean, as a trained as a doctor. I wanted to get out of Melbourne, so where did I go? I went to Albury, and I went to the hospital there, and then I went from there to the American hospital in Paris, and then I went from there to working for Save the Children Fund in Eastern Sudan, and working in a refugee camp. So there, I completely had to change the way, well, sort of the medicine I'd learnt, because the medicine I'd learnt, Melbourne, obviously a lot of it's applicable, but a lot of it isn't applicable. And you really got to change your view of, well, how do you operate in a situation with completely different resources in a different culture? And I found that fascinating, and I really started to learn about community health and around public health, because it's, when you're working in an area where you're basically seeing a problem come again and again and again in the same day, you're starting to think, well, why is this happening? What lies behind? What's the causes of these illnesses? I was working in a mother and child health clinic, so we started to work with educating the mothers, working with them, starting to learn about what was going on in the community, and I really started to think about medicine in a different way and started to think about health. I came back to Australia, started to work in for Congress in Central Australia, so working in a community-controlled, Aboriginal community-controlled health organisation. Again, a number of the same problems occurring all the time, and you're realising, well, hang on, this is actually because of the world they're living in and these big forces on them, rather than just whether people take a particular choice. So it took me about 12 years to realise that I probably wanted to move into public health, not just work in clinical medicine.
I see. So that part is the turning point where you decided to be a public health.
Well, it was actually HIV. I mean, it was AIDS came along in well, it was about 1985, when I was in Sudan again. And then in 1986 came back to Central Australia, and then HIV appears. And we're going, my goodness, this is going to be huge, have a huge impact on Indigenous Australians, because of the very high levels of existing in that time anyway of sexually transmissible infections. So I really got very interested. I actually started to do some work with WHO in national short-term plan HIV plans, working in the Pacific, in Fiji and Solomons, and really enjoyed that, and really started to learn about a health issue, obviously a huge health issue, but in the community context, and really appreciated that. So I thought, well, my brain isn't big enough to be both a public health person and a clinician, so I chose public health.
I see. So, speaking of HIV, Something happened in 1995 in your experience, which is like, I think it's a turning point in leadership. You were assigned exactly like 30 years ago. You stepped into a major leadership role as a director of country program at UNAIDS in Geneva.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me more about that experience and how is it like sparkle the interest in you for leadership and how is
Yeah. Yeah, no, no, I mean, it was a interesting time. I mean, it actually goes back to when I'd work with Médecins Sans Frontières in Eastern Sudan. I was running a large multinational team in a refugee camp that had really appeared overnight, the size of Obugodongo. I mean, 70,000 people, and I was running this large team, or meant to be running it. My only qualifications were I'd been there before. I
Mm.
was a doctor, and probably I was male. But that is not a qualification, but just happens to be the what was the at that time. You see, so I really had no attributes or qualifications to be a leader, and I didn't do a particularly good job, I don't think. And I left. I was there for about 5 months, but I didn't reflect on it. I went back to Central Australia and just carried on with the job I'd been doing there. Um, and that really, in retrospect, that's really taught me how important reflection is because I didn't learn actually from that experience.
Mm.
I've learned it from it now, but so then 9 years later, I get the job running UNAIDS country programs. So this was a new program. Basically, the international community had said to WHO, "You're not doing a good enough job. You're not working with the other organisations, UNDP and UNICEF and the World Bank. We will start this new organisation called UNAIDS." And so my job was to get this program up and running in 50 countries, literally overnight, with a lot of antipathy from WHO and from all the organisations we're meant to bring together in one happy family. So that was pretty interesting, and this was sort of trying to get something going all over the globe, and I just did not have the leadership skills, I don't think, and I found it really very stressful, and I was traveling a lot, and I was literally. I remember one night went I left the office at 11 p.m. and came back at 1 a.m. So this is the notion of how do you deal with problems? You just, you pedal faster without realizing that, there are some things that are really urgent and important, and there are other things that are urgent but not particularly important. So, sorting even sort of how I would run my day, I had a limited capacity, and I had a 360-degree assessment done of me, which is this notion of your people report you, comment on you, your peers comment on you, and your boss comments on you. And it it was a little damning, let's put it that way. That people. I had a different view about my leadership capacity than most of the people I was dealing with. I can tell you, but if you got sort of, it's like a sort of major rejection of a grant or of a paper or something, and you go, oh, that's not very good. What do I do about it? And fortunately, I had a coach, a guy called Piers Campbell, who really started to teach me, and I was very keen to learn about, well, what are the leadership skills that I should develop. And how should I go about this? And I was there for about 3 years, then came back to Vic Health and run Vic Health, and that was great because I then practiced on them for a good 9 years. All that I'd learned, and I had to continue to have a coach, which so I started to learn about and to write about leadership skill development that was appropriate for public health. And then when I came to I'm a sort of lackadaisical academic. I mean, I came to Melbourne Uni after that. Uh, I thought, well, why don't we teach this? Because no one else is teaching it. Um, it's not a compulsory part of the MPH. The biostats and epidemiology and qualitative research and health policy, but nothing about the fundamental human skills that are really important.
Yeah, I can't agree more. But Rob, if you could whisper something to Rob on his very first day in that role, what would you say to him now?
Well, it might even be don't do it, or go away and learn about some skills and then come back and do it, or just start learning as you're going rather than just doing. learning, having a coach or having an introduction into fundamental um, leadership skills that are really, whether it's around coaching and mentoring, whether it's about how to manage conflict, how to manage performance, how to negotiate, how to set vision, how to problem solve. I mean, how to, make decisions. I mean, I learnt actually how to got better at making decisions, but I mean, I was born on a fence. So I know, I look at, oh, that's right. And then you look over there and say, no, that's right. So, it's hard to, if you see things in shades of grey all the time, it's harder to make decisions than if you see things in some people think in more black and white. So it's coming to terms what Socrates says, know thyself. And I've realized the importance of emotional intelligence in all of this, how important self-awareness is, how important self-regulation is. And I've got a few good examples where I completely lost my sense of self-regulation in that UNAIDS job. And those other issues around empathy and social skills.
Yeah, like if today's someone gonna step in for a leadership role in public health, from your experiences, what is the three main skills that is must be to in a leader in public health? If you
Well,
can.
can I just backtrack a bit on what leadership is? Because leadership is not necessarily associated with authority. It should be, but it often isn't. There's lots of people, lots of bosses who are terrible leaders, and lots of leaders who have no authority. So you'd love them to be both. And as I see now with our new head of school, um, uh, Santoran Petrica. He's a really good example of someone who's now got authority as the head of school, but also has great leadership skills. And as has the new head of Vic Health, Anna Peters, really bright, smart, but really good, emotionally intelligent, really good leader. So that's the point about when leadership is not necessarily about the great leader. I don't believe in the great leader syndrome. And that's why there's a really good article called Zombie Leadership, dead ideas that are still hanging around. And so I'm interested in the skills for everybody, and that in many ways leadership is, in my view of leadership, it's a much more democratic approach so that anybody in an organization has a capacity to lead. They don't have necessarily have the authority, but they have capacity to lead on an issue and it's our job to look for those people and encourage them and support them. So we're allowing people, no matter where they are, to really maximize their own potential. And that's my understanding of what my definition of leadership is. How do I maximize my own potential as a public health practitioner? And how do I maximize the value and meaning that I draw and worth that I draw from my own life? So it's these skills are much more than just work. They're about the way we live as humans. But it's also to how do I help maximize the potential of people I work with and people I relate to, and how do I help them maximize the meaning and worth they draw from their lives as well. So that's my own view. I wouldn't ask anybody else to adopt it, but I just think it's really important to have your own view.
It's actually this is my first time is hearing this view, which is there is a difference between authority and leadership.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean like every leadership meaning that mean you have to be in authority like
Yeah.
status. So everyone in the organization could be a leader.
Absolutely. It's a question of if you are actually in a position of authority, well, how do you help others build their own leadership capacity? And we see that with someone like Greta Thunberg. And I mean, she's got no authority at all. Is she a leader? Absolutely. I mean, many people show really good examples of they've had no power, they've had no authority, but they're brilliant leaders because they've taken an idea and they've moved with it and they've run with it. And yet we see, and obviously Trump is the classic, someone in authority who's such a dreadful leader. Yeah.
I see. So you have like really, can you tell me more about your philosophy of leadership? Like,
Well, I just sort of heard it really. I mean, It's the notion. I mean, there's a lovely article by Amanda Sinclair, who's an emeritus professor at the Melbourne Business School, and she talks about leadership of the disillusioned, and or for the disillusioned, and it's basically about the notion that leadership for her is not about the captains of industry type. It's not the beating of the chest, rah rah, I'm the great leader. It's a much more democratic form that we as parents or teachers or spokespeople or activists are talking about, and the roles that we play. So, I mean, some of the best teachers you'll see are teachers or parents, because they are leading. And it allows for people, as I say, it's not related to, well, we can only have certain people are born with it. Well, I don't believe that people are born with it. Some are better at it and naturally better at it, and they have some of these skills. But virtually, when I run these courses, and we're now up to almost 100, that we're looking at 23 skills, a comprehensive list. It's not exhaustive, but it's building those skills, and they're pretty much all learnable.
Hmm. Oh, I see, because there is a controversial or a debate between is leadership is acquired or could we born with it? But I think from what you said, it's something like everyone could learn it anywhere.
I simply do not believe the issue that you're either born with it or you're not. I mean, it's in my mind, it's complete rubbish. And you watch good people who can develop the skills, and we do it all the time in these calls. You just watch people develop skills around. They develop their own level of confidence, self-awareness. They then realize, oh my goodness, I can do this. Yeah, I've got the skill. I can understand. That's why we try and break the skills down into component parts so that people can understand them and then practice them. And we get people to walk out the door. Okay, choose one or two or three skills that you want to get better at. And here's how you can practice. This is what you need to do. You need to be accountable to someone probably to do it. Time management, for example. Then you they're all pretty much learnable in my view.
Learnable. Speaking of learning from experiences, just going back to that point where you said in your experience in Geneva, uh, you didn't learn from it right away because you didn't reflect on it. But now, since you reflect on that experience, you learn more about it. Could you tell me about the importance of reflecting on your experiences or in what is happening in your life or your work or professional,
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
on
And
learning and link it to leadership?
yeah, well, I mean, one of the things in the leadership courses we run is actually really trying to develop reflective leaders.
Hmm.
And I mean, reflection's a skill that is basically a form of feedback, right?
Yeah.
It's a form of self-feedback. And one of the best ways you can, and if you look at Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence, then the way that you can develop emotional intelligence is actually by feedback from others. Well, you can also do it by feedback from yourself. And that's why you need a sort of level of it's related to self-awareness. So you can internally be self-aware or get other people's view. But um, you know, reflection, how did I do? That's why I say I really didn't learn from this first experience when in working for Médecins Sans Frontières, but I did from the UNAIDS experience, and now I'm constantly learning about what works and what doesn't work, and what works for me and what doesn't, what doesn't work for me, and it's important that people sort of develop their own pathways. I have a particular pathway for looking after my mental health, which is meditation. And I used to come back from 10-day courses and tell everybody to do it. And you'd have this rather blank look at, I'm never going to do a 10-day course. Thanks very much. And so, increasingly you work out that, well, people need to choose their own way. But, that's why you need to reflect to find out what's really the best way for you. I mean, if I reflect also in terms of when have I learned the most? It's when I've had really big failures. That's when you learn really fast. And if you can come to terms with your own failures, and appreciate that it's a learning opportunity as well as a dreadful experience, then then it makes the experience not so dreadful and more worthwhile. And I've learnt a lot from things I haven't done well rather than necessarily things that I've done well.
Yeah, just adding something about that, I read something from a professor in Stanford said, instead of you having like a CV for all of your accomplishment, you should have a failure CV also
Yeah,
as well.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, just to write down where things doesn't or went
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. No, no,
You will
that's
learn from
a
that
lovely
CV.
idea. Yeah, and try and submit that for a job. When people say in you're going for a job interview and they say, "Well, what are your weaknesses?" And all you have to, and you're sort of forced to come back with, "Oh, my weaknesses, I just work too hard." Which is not, which is actually a weakness, but it's not perceived to be one. So, yeah.
Just translating that into really practical when there isn't like, listen to us. How can we do it in real life, like the reflection, just in the practical steps? Is it something like you write down what happened in the day, like diaries, or it is an open way of reflecting, like talking to yourself maybe, or writing
Yeah,
down?
no, it's an interesting
Oh,
way of thinking about it. I mean, journaling certainly one. It depends on I mean, I like journaling and I've always done it. But I tend to journal. I tend to write when things are not going well, more than when things are going well, because it stimulates me to think more about what's going on. But I mean, you can reflect in literally, at the end of the day, and thinking, well, what happened today? What am I grateful for? What do I think worked well? What was good, and then what didn't go so well. So it's done in a spirit of self-compassion. That you're hugging yourself, not just beating yourself up. Because I mean, you can introspect in a way that's really quite dangerous or harmful when why did I do this? Why did I do that? And so being very judgmental about yourself. And so this notion of having compassion and saying, well, I'm really grateful for what has happened today, or the fact that I'm still vertical, which is what I'm pretty grateful for most days. And then I'm reflecting on that worked well, that didn't work well. Again, just being careful to be really constructive about your own feedback. You can then get feedback from others. I mean, some of the skills that we're talking about are really you can really improve, I think, pretty rapidly by getting feedback from loving, as I say, from loving critics. So people that care for you and you feel safe with them. You don't go and ask someone that doesn't like you much. But I mean, if you're giving an oral presentation, then ask someone beforehand, never after, but ask them beforehand, can you look at this and this and this and this and tell me what you thought? So you're giving them permission to give you really constructive feedback.
mm,
And you do that 4 or 5 times, and you'll probably improve pretty rapidly. If you're responsible for chairing a meeting or running a group, can do the same thing. Did I engage everybody? Did the meeting run well? Did everybody listen to each other? Did we have good outcomes? Those sorts of things. And that helps you really understand where things are going, because you're reflecting yourself, but you're also asking someone to give you feedback. That's a really cheap and easy way to improve a skill that is incredibly important. I mean, we spend so much time, you probably don't yet, Joe, but you spend a lot of time in meetings, and probably for most people, 2/3 of the time they think is a waste of time. And yet we don't teach it to each other. How do you do this really well? If the meeting doesn't have a purpose, don't have the meeting. You know, make it much shorter than it would otherwise be. But would you go into this endless cycle of meetings, and where the result of one meeting is to have another meeting?
oh, I see. So it's just being open, be resilient, and accept feedback and constructive feedback from others. Just open the door for them and be humble to praise your failures and learn from them.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's the notion of sort of vulnerability has come very strong in the last few years, which is really about acknowledging that. that you make mistakes and you don't get things right all the time. And I think particularly for people in leadership positions, then it's a really good thing to have because it allows other people literally in the door. I mean, it allows them to have access to you as a person. If you're perfect and you never make mistakes, people can't work with you. They're too afraid to, because you're perfect and they're worried about their own imperfections. So, allowing this notion of psychological safety where people can voice problems, where um, when they can say what they're worried about or say that something's not working well, and that adds to the benefit of the whole organization. But if the leaders saying, pretty much they don't like mistakes, then no one will ever tell them about it.
I see. So this is why, because before we start this meeting, you said something about it's not soft skills, it's more humanitarian skill.
Essential human skills. I mean, these are the
Mm,
skills you need to do a job well that I'm interested in. We call them leadership skills,
mm.
and they're needed for really good leaders. But the point is, learn them and you'll do your job better. You'll be able to put your technical skills into use in a much more fruitful way.
I see. So, uh, I now I connect the dots because I was reading about the six domain leadership. Sorry. Oh, my throat is not clear. My
All
throat.
right.
I was reading about the model that is included six domains, and I was surprised. It was the model that is in public health. There's two of which focus on emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Why? I was when I read it, my questions having like why there's two domains focusing only
Well,
in
I guess just because I mean again, it's probably a prejudice of mine, but I mean, it's that so much of the stuff around when I was doing this around leadership is about leadership of others. It's about them, right, rather than being about us. I think start with us. Start with our own emotions, start with our own emotional intelligence, start with our own self-awareness. You watch unself-aware leaders or people in positions of authority, and they can cause such damage. You watch people that have poor self-regulation, they do enormous damage to others. And you can have highly charismatic people who have, driven by a wrong set of values, and they do enormous damage. So actually having a high level of emotional intelligence and understanding your own emotions, how they affect you, how they affect other people, um, is really, I think, an essential part of good leadership.
Hmm. So leading yourself first and leading your emotion,
Yeah,
then you can lead your team or your organization
yeah,
or ah.
and that's the notion of also in terms of self-care. I would say be selfish to be generous. If you want to, it's the same as if you're in a family. I mean, look after yourself so that you can look after others. Otherwise, if you don't, then you simply burn out. And in the health professions, we're all helpers. So many of it, why we're there. It's because we want to help. Now, if you do that without really looking after your own self, it's a bit like, as you know, in an aeroplane when not that the oxygen ever comes down, fortunately, but if the oxygen comes down, then you put it on yourself before you put it on your child.
Mm.
Because you put it on your child first, and you flake out, then the child's stuck. So it's a matter of people being encouraged to really look very actively after their own mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health.
I see. You just remind me of they say before they say like work hard to get to be happy, and now there's a movement saying be happy so you could work harder. So they flip the equation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, do you live to work or do you work to live? You probably work to live.
Yeah, there are many leadership styles. Uh, what is the style that is or the type of leadership that is most fit the public health field?
Yeah, I mean. I mean, the sort of the models that I like the most are transcendent leaders and servant leaders. And the notion of and there's another one. Jim Collins does this stuff called Good to Great, and looked at business models and looked at community models as well, and had this notion of five different levels of leadership. And the fifth level was the really good leaders he found was it was a combination of fierce resolve, like people are really work hard on what they're doing,
Mm.
but a paradoxical level of humility. And you think, humility, leadership, does that
Mm.
go? Well, it does. I mean, if the whole interest of yours is in the output of the organization, it's not about you and your ego or you and your status. It's much more about you're sitting under, like a servant leader, you're sitting underneath the organization to help them grow rather than being at the top of the organization where everybody's just reporting to you. So it's a different way of doing it. I mean, one of the best leaders I know is a woman, and I take a lot of inspiration from leaders I know and people I've worked with. And one in particular is a woman called Kieran Martin, who is a pediatrician who literally jumped the fence in of a Delhi slum in 1988. So it's now 37 years she's been working at this. And literally going to start with rehydrating kids now to providing health services for 700,000 people in 100 Delhi slums, where their outcomes are better than the rest of Delhi, where the number of boys compared to the number of girls, or number of girls compared to the number of boys, is the universal norm, not the norm as it is in New Delhi. So it's 956 per thousand girls to boys, which is the universal norm. In Delhi, it's about 840 to 1,000. So, what they've been able to do and her leadership is quite extraordinary. I mean, she's charismatic, works incredibly hard, but is very much about empowering others. Another woman I worked with in Uganda, a woman called Noreen Kaliba, right at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, her husband died of HIV. She was a physiotherapist. She was the first person on that continent really to say, welcome if you have AIDS. Come in the door. We will look after you. Rather than at that stage, this is in the late 80s, they're being literally pushed out the door. You've got slim disease. We don't want anything to do with you. And so she changed the dynamic and the way that the whole nation in Uganda looked at HIV. So yeah, I just love looking at good leaders and learning from them.
What is the common trait between these great leaders, or like really
Ones that I think are good. Well, they're all, it's a bit like what I was saying before about Jim Collins. I mean, that they all work incredibly hard. They're really dedicated. Um, they listen really well. Really good leaders have big ears, right? And they use their ears and their tongue in the proportion they're given them. So they listen more, talk less. And why does that? And that shows an enormous amount of respect. If you listen well, it's a great way of communicating without saying a thing. It's because you're showing respect. Um, so they have a lot of these. I mean, they're good decision makers. They've got really high levels of emotional intelligence. They've got good balance. They aren't afraid of conflict. Um, they can, negotiate well. They've got good, strong technical credibility. They know what their job's about.
in
Um, they're good communicators. They're good visionaries as well.
That's really great. Now it's like moving to our because we are approaching the end, uh,
Hmm.
and we will talk about the next generation of public health leaders or professionals.
Yep.
What is your expectation of the next generation, or what is your hopes of the next generation of public health professionals?
They'll do better, much better things than we have done. Yeah. So it's over to you guys. I mean, in many ways, the world is becoming that much more complex. I mean, it's this VUCA world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think it's increasingly that case. But um, it's really focusing on a really good set of values that apply to public health. It's focused on equity. I mean, the biggest driver of mine philosophically or politically would be fairness,
Mm.
would be equity, and we've done a worse job in that in Australia in the last 20 years. We've gone backwards, not forwards, as we have globally, I think. But I would ask of your generation, A, learn from our mistakes, but B, learn how to work together.
Mm.
Learn how to work across disciplines. I mean, if we're working, I mean, the area of commercial determinants of health now, then we need to work with public health lawyers, with business analysts, with digital strategists, with investigative journalists, with politicians, with political scientists, with political economists, um, urban planners, people that have experience in a whole range of different sectors to us. And we've got to be adept in listening to what they've got to say and aligning our interests with them, both in the sort of third sector, but also obviously within the government sector and increasingly with the private sector. How can we work with the commercial drivers so we can start to find people who are interested in their commerce, not only making a profit, but making a profit for a good outcome, and that's a problem we have, that greed is driving a lot of the outcomes. And if you look at tobacco or alcohol or junk food or gambling or fossil fuels or building prisons or private education, then it's around. Unfortunately, a lot of it's around greed, and we have a neoliberal um, economic system that is driving for less regulation, less tax, which means less available um, um, for people. I'm very much for a much more compassionate form of capitalism,
Mm.
so that it's about sharing the resources, not sucking them up to fewer and fewer people, which is what we have now. I mean, when you've got someone like Gina Reinhardt, with 35 billion, I mean, you can go spend 35 billion. You can't. I mean, that's why I do admire the fact that Bill Gates, and I had a chat to people from the Gates Foundation this morning, that, he's going to basically donate all his money through his foundation, which is what
Wow,
the world needs.
that's really impressive. That's really great expectations from the new generations. Um, some people, including me, after graduating from the MPH, the public health is really diverse, and there's a lot of opportunities. And working as a researcher, or shall I work as a technician or a professional, a public health professional? One of your interviews, you said, I'm not a researcher, I'm not interested in introducing new knowledge, and instead, I'm more interested in applying that knowledge because we have a lot of knowledge that need to be implemented. Uh,
Hmm.
I was really curious, Rob, when you realized that point, which is you are not a researcher, or you're not a person who interested in like introducing new knowledge, but rather you want to implement and carry out all this knowledge and translate it in a real world practice.
Yeah.
How can we identify that? Just like, or how can we?
Well, yeah, but I mean, the point is, I mean, my history is that I started a clinical role, uh,
Yeah.
evolved into a community health role, and then into a public health role before I did my MPH. And I was never really introduced to the world of research, other than doing some of it myself, until I came to the university, which is, by that time I'm 58 or so, 50, I'm quite a lot older, and I don't think like a researcher, but I've always been into. That's why I worked in programs for so long, because I'm interested in how the research. Because I mean, when I was at Vic Health, for example, we used to really rely on fabulous work done through the Cancer Council on tobacco. So utilising their information, how they can actually implement that, change policies, change legislation so that you can improve people's lives. That I love, that application. I love the researchers, but that's just not me. You got to find out where do you fit, where are your skills most use, and wouldn't be much. I'm not much use. I mean, I like policy research in a sense, but I'm not really interested in fundamental or public health research as it is. So it depends on, your own predilection for what you like and what you don't like, what you're good at. And I mean, this notion of Ikigai, I don't know if you heard of about the Japanese, how you live a very long life. Do
Mm.
what you love, do what you're good at, do what the world needs, and do what you can get paid for.
That's really good. So try it and
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly grateful that I've generally been able to do that. Yeah.
yeah, we're approaching the end. So this is space for you just to share any advice or any final word for the emerging leaders who listen to us.
Yeah, I'd be less worried about the notion of leadership and much more concerned about, am I developing skills, really good essential human skills, so I can work with anybody. So I can learn as I'm going, and I can really, yeah, I can align myself with a whole lot of other forces. I don't need to run another NGO.
Hmm.
Need to help, and one that's actually up and running, perhaps. There's not a question of, it has to be me. It's how do I work within a group that works with others? Because in public health, we have a lot of forces against us. I mean, a lot of it's commercial. We've got to work out very smart ways of working together, so that we can literally help the community be better off.
That's really amazing. Ro, that's really insightful and eye-opening discussion. Thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for our listeners for tuning in. Stay tuned for our next episode.